Today's head-on is Bluff. The subheadline says, an account of one of the early battles of the war. This article was written to the editor of the National Tribune. It says, in your good old soldier paper, True Blue, a comrade from Boyne Falls, Michigan wishes to know if Colonel James A. Suter, or any comrade, remembers crossing the Potomac at or near Leesburg, Virginia. I wish to inform the comrade, for one, how near a regiment and brigade came to being caught in that death trap with no hope of escape. General Stone, as I learned, ordered Colonel Baker to cross the Potomac at Ball's Bluff with 2 or 3 regiments, also ordered General Gorman's brigade to cross at Edwards Ferry about 2 miles below. When our regiment, the 34th New York, Colonel Suter commanding, arrived at the ferry from Seneca Mills, the 1st Minnesota of our brigade had crossed over the river on an old scow, as had also a small squad of cavalry. Our regiment was next pulled over, and 2 pieces of artillery of Ricketts Battery. It was nearly dark and very cold, and some of the boys started a rail fire on the bank of Goose Creek near the river. While warming, I discovered someone floating down the river. I called Captain King's attention to it, who stood by me at the time, and we went down and got a small skiff and went out and got him and fetched him in. He proved to be one of Colonel Baker's boys from up the river. He informed us when he found that we were friends that Colonel Baker was shot and they were all cut up. This was the first that we had learned of the death and disaster of Colonel Baker. This news was kept so quiet that very few of the boys found it out. In the morning, our Company G went out to the front and relieved a company of the 1st Minnesota Advance Picket. There was a drizzly rain falling at the time and mud was plenty. A company of Andrew's sharpshooters went out beyond us through a cornfield and commenced to bang away quite lively. This was kept up until 4 o'clock p.m. When the Louisiana Tigers could not stand it any longer, they made a gallant dash for them, and our battery of 2 brass pieces opened fire on them. Our company rallied to the left, giving the battery boys a good range on them, which they improved with a will. I would like to hear from some of those old battery boys for your valued paper. When they got within a few rods of the battery, they ran into the 1st Minnesota, who were lying along a rail fence by a cornfield which hid them from view, and they gave them a galling fire, which they could not stand. They went out by the left flank, running the gauntlet of this regiment, which felt well repaid for former treatment they received at the first Bull Run. We lost 1 man from the 1st Minnesota who was wounded through the leg and then murdered by bayonet thrust through his body, and the wounding of Colonel Lander in the leg, who afterward died from its effects. That night we recrossed the river after a hard night's work and went into winter quarters at Camp McClellan between Poolesville and Edwards Ferry, Maryland. Previous to this, Captain Sponable of our regiment crossed the Potomac one dark night at Seneca Mills with about 20 men to secure some rebel property, and was ambushed by a company of Confederates who were lying in wait for him, and lost 3 or 4 men. One was Bob Garcia, from whom I learned, after his escape and return to us, as follows. He said our chaplain Van Patten had crossed over the river to see what he could find, and called at a house owned by a man by the name of White, who invited him to take dinner, and who claimed to be a staunch Union man, and treated him with great courtesy, and got him to consent to fetch over a squad of soldiers some dark night, and he would show them where they could get a lot of goods, horses, guns, etc. The chaplain came back to camp, informed Captain Sponable what was up, and he consented to go over and secure the goods on the night appointed. White, the traitor, went up to a small place back from the river 2 or 3 miles to Drainesville, and got a company of Confederates from a regiment that was stationed there, and lay in ambush along a wood road near his house, and when our boys came along, fired a volley into them, and it is a great wonder that anyone escaped alive. Old White, who acted as the Confederate guide and was prominent in the fray, finding Bob Garcia still alive, placed his smoking revolver to his breast and shot him through the lungs, and would have killed him if the Confederate officer had not told him if he fired again on the man that was down, he would run his sword through him. Captain Sponable swam the Potomac that night and was utterly exhausted, but was ready to take his company over and clean out Old White and the rest of them that enticed him into such a trap. Comrade Garcia made his escape from Drainesville by drugging the guard one dark night and got down to the river by daylight when our boys went over and got him. He returned just before our regiment broke camp at Seneca Mills. Major Wells Sponable could give you a more glowing account of this affair and tell us something that happened to old traitor White. Colonel James A. Suter as well. I see him often and hope his life may be spared for 100 years for the brave part he took in the late unpleasantness. This article was written by Dr. D.P. Vancourt of Mohawk, New York. This story comes from the great District of Columbia, being reported in the National Tribune of December 27, 1888. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.